I have this folder on my computer desktop called Death Threats. It's sad to say that this can be par for the course when you're a woman with an opinion on the internet, especially a feminist opinion. The folder name might sound a little, terrifying, but I think it's important to call things what they actually are. There's this thing that we used to call misogyny or sexism that we now call misogynist trolling whenever it happens on the internet. Trolling is a storied internet tradition. The modus operandi, to pretend to hold a particular point of view with the sole or primary purpose of creating chaos in a community. And because trolls are mainly there to provoke just for the sake of provocation, the troll fighting strategy has always been to ignore them. Don't feed the trolls, we say. So when we call a spouter of vile misogyny a troll, what are we really saying? We're saying, don't take it seriously, ignore it. Tell me why I shouldn't take these kinds of things seriously. These have all been directed at either me or women I know through my organization, Women in Toronto Politics. Many of these things sound a lot like the misogyny a woman might face in the workplace, in her home, on the street. Do we tell women not to take a workplace sexual harasser seriously? What about a woman whose work takes place on the internet? Can she just ignore it? Should rape threats be a rite of passage for women with something to say on the internet? And the goal of many of these alleged trolls isn't just to provoke people, it's to shut women up. And by not engaging them, we're giving them exactly what they want. Sounds like a pretty great strategy, right? There's something else that really bothers me about the use of the word troll to describe garden variety misogyny. It suggests that this is an internet problem rather than a society problem, one that's been around in countless cultures over countless centuries. Why qualify it with a word like trolling when really it's misogyny and it's hideous? I'm going to tell you a story today about hatred of women on the internet. I'll talk about some of the features of online communication that have allowed misogyny to flourish, and also some of the features of online misogyny that make it easier than ever to confront, challenge, and change. Last summer, misogynists were engaged in a virulent hate campaign against Anita Sarkeesian, a feminist media critic who was crowdfunding a video series to look at how women are represented in video games. They besieged her YouTube and Kickstarter pages with misogynist and anti-Semitic comments. They vandalized her Wikipedia page. They drew and photoshopped her into some truly disgusting, violent, pornographic scenes. And worst of all, one man in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, built a video game inviting players to click on a close-up photo of Anita's face and watch bruises and contusions appear until she was basically a bloody pulp. You may not want to look at this next slide. There we go. I mean, what is it about the internet that encouraged this guy to publish this game and to put that out there? First of all, social distance. After hitting publish, he could leave his computer, go make dinner, and not have to look Anita in the face. Because the communication takes place in a virtual space, it's easy for many internet users to convince themselves that the people, the subject matter, and even in some cases their own actions are somehow not real. Another key feature of online communication is performance. We tailor our words and expressions with an audience in mind. The misogynists attacking Anita Sarkeesian were doing so, at least in part, to draw a reaction from an audience. The Beat Up Anita Sarkeesian game was an interactive performance. The creator vividly staged his own views and invited players to get up on stage with him. Finally, at least so far, the internet has largely been a consequence-free zone. Law enforcement's use of the internet has mainly been directed toward piracy, terrorism, and child pornography. And only very recently have they really begun to investigate things like online harassment, hate speech, and death threats. But I'm not just talking about a lack of state-sanctioned consequences here, which, let's face it, tend not to apply to everyone equally, and in many cases actually have the effect of making things worse. I'm also talking about a lack of social consequences, like maybe facing a torrent of criticism for your garbage behavior. A dominant wisdom that says don't feed the trolls means that many misogynists and other bigots never have to face their critics because their critics are encouraged to shut up. Not only does this mean that they can continue their behavior with impunity, but it gives them the impression that their views are popular. This is one thing we internet users have the power to change. And in the case of the beat-up Anita Sarkeesian game, it was one thing I couldn't allow to stand. When I visited the site where the game had been hosted, the game had been taken down, but its description, as well as the username of its creator, Bendelin Spur, remained. I searched for Bendelin on Twitter, and I found him in seconds. His Twitter feed was filled with derogatory and vaguely misogynist comments about Anita, so it was pretty clearly the same Bendelin Spur. I confronted him with this tweet. The tweet intentionally drew a parallel between his online and offline selves by asking if the game represented his actions IRL, or in real life, if you don't use the internet as much as I do. In another tweet, I suggested employers might just find his game objectionable and notified the Twitter account of his local newspaper. The conversation caught fire, and within an hour, hundreds of Twitter users were participating in some capacity. When I documented the confrontation and Bendelin's response the next morning, the post spread like wildfire, drawing thousands more into the discussion. On a massive scale, people were demonstrating where they stood on the matter, and in doing so, they were drawing new lines in the sand of our social interactions. So, how were we able to confront this man through means that might not have been available offline? Well, remember how the performative nature of online behavior encourages new expressions of the same old misogyny? Well, online performance can also challenge that behavior. By confronting Bendelin in a public forum like Twitter, rather than, say, emailing him, I was demonstrating or performing the type of way that I thought would be good to challenge him. And my performance, like his game, was interactive. I invited audience members, if you will, to leap out of their seats and get on stage. Now, I couldn't control what they did once they got there, but I could model or perform the type of engagement I wanted to see and hope that others would either follow my lead or maybe teach me something new in the process. Another key feature of online communication is visibility. The internet has made examples of misogyny and other forms of bigotry much more public and visible than they once were. Think about it. Once upon a time, the average misogynist's views were mainly inflicted on people in his immediate social circle or day-to-day interactions. A partner, a colleague, a family member, a waitress. And in many cases, there was no permanent record that those on the receiving end could point to say, this was real, it really happened, and it was really painful. Now, thanks to the internet, misogyny's targets are diffuse, and its expressions are time-stamped. There are websites like Fat, Ugly, or Slutty that invite internet users to submit derogatory comments made at women gamers. There are Twitter accounts like Everyday Sexism that retweet so many real-life sexist microaggressions per hour that any follower would be hard-pressed to say sexism is no longer a problem. In this way, the internet has actually made it easier for people who have never been subject to a form of bigotry to understand just how widespread and harmful it is. Games like the Beat Up Anita Sarkeesian game are highly visible examples of misogyny that I and other critics can point to. Visible examples like these can become the catalysts for bigger, macro-level discussions about the problems they represent. Finally, discussions about bigotry on the internet can go viral, spreading far beyond the bigot and their initial target. This does, of course, mean that hate campaigns like the one against Anita Sarkeesian can go viral and recruit lots more misogynists, so that's the downside. But I think it's important to remember that challenges to that misogyny can also pick up steam. As of last night, my initial post of the confrontation with Bendel and Spur had been shared nearly 30,000 times. See, bigotry can be elusive to bigots themselves. Sexism and misogyny, when you think about it, are in many ways our status quo. So if you say something sexist, it might not really seem sexist. It might just seem normal. Bendel and Spur had convinced himself that creating a video game simulating the brutalization of a feminist he disagreed with was not misogynist. And if it had just been me disagreeing with him, it might have been a lot easier for observers to believe that too. But thanks to the virality of the conversation, thousands of people were in his virtual face saying, "Actually, dude, that's pretty misogynist." The thing is, social norms, yeah, shout out to Gabe Knox, hilarious. See, the thing about social norms is they don't just trickle from the top down. We create them collectively. With enough voices coming together on an issue, we can reach new frontiers of fairness and justice in our interactions, online and offline. That is why a dictum like "don't feed the trolls" is so harmful and even dangerous when you apply it to something like misogyny. It creates a discourse dominated by misogynists. I want to close by telling you about how you can use some of these features of online communication to better understand and confront bigotry in your day-to-day life. Visibility means that whether you're subject to a form of bigotry or not, chances are examples of it will abound on the internet. Use that visibility to help change the tide. Follow websites and Twitter accounts of people who speak out about bigotry regularly, as well as aggregators like "Yes, You're Racist." Bookmark the really vivid examples to share with someone who tells you that racism is no longer a serious problem in our society. Virality means that inevitably some of these conversations about bigotry will reach your newsfeed or timeline. When that happens, don't sit on the sidelines. Participate. State your opinion in a comment thread. Voice your agreement or disagreement with another commenter, or even just like or retweet a comment that you agree with. It's not that hard. We want as many voices as possible to be involved in drawing these new lines in our social sand. Finally, perform the type of engagement you want to see. Argue for the kinds of change you think are important in ways that you would like to see others argue for them, and invite others to be part of your performance. Start by considering the implications of using a dismissive word like trolling to describe misogyny and other forms of dehumanizing bigotry. If this is the word our society is bent on using to describe this kind of viewpoint, then frankly, we need a whole new philosophy for dealing with trolls. Strike "don't feed the trolls" from your lexicon if you're talking about a misogynist. We feed bigots by meeting their hatred with collective silence.